she stumbled out of the blizzard, barefoot, frostbitten, and silent, clutching nothing but a blood-stained journal stitched into her dress. This true story in America begins not with a scream, but with a whisper from a girl who hadn't spoken in weeks. In the winter of 1863, a snowstorm swept across the Utah frontier, but what it uncovered was far colder than ice. A 17-year-old girl collapsed outside a sheriff's outpost, her feet blue, her eyes hollow, and her name unknown. When officers opened the journal, she carried pages torn, smeared with ink and something darker. They didn't just find words. They found confessions, rituals, names, and a chilling history buried deep inside a place no outsider had entered in nearly a decade. That journal would expose one of the most disturbing cult secrets in American history, a forgotten chapter of horror cloaked in holiness. Before sunrise, her testimony would ignite an investigation that would burn a compound to the ground. This is the real-life story of Clara Whitlow and what happened inside Hollow Creek. Lock your door, lower the lights, because what you're about to hear is not just a survivor's tale. It's the kind of story that makes America's darkest nightmares feel too close to home. The wind howled like a living thing as the girl emerged from the white void barefoot, frostbitten and barely breathing. Her hair was matted with snow and blood. Her hands clenched around the tattered hem of her cotton dress where something had been stitched inside. Locals would later say she looked like a ghost, or worse, a warning. She collapsed just 40 feet from Sheriff Dalton Price's front porch. Her lips blue, her skin cracked like old parchment. No one knew her name, but sewn beneath her dress was a crude journal stitched shut with fishing wire and marked with the initials C. That journal didn't just speak, it screamed. Inside it were names, dates, rituals, and a secret so unholy it would rattle even the most hardened lawman. In less than 72 hours, that girl's story would turn Hollow Creek from a forgotten religious commune into a true crime nightmare, etched into America's darkest history. And yet, no one, not even the sheriff, was prepared for what the next few pages would reveal. They thought she was dead, until her eyes opened and whispered, "Don't go back there." It was just past midnight when Sheriff Dalton Price spotted the figure through the frost-covered glass of his lantern-lit cabin. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, maybe worse. But when he stepped onto his porch, the image that met him would haunt him forever. A teenage girl, barefoot and half frozen, stood swaying in the snow, her skin blue white and her lips trembling without sound. She didn't knock. She didn't cry. She simply collapsed. Her body weighed barely 90 pounds, and her feet were torn open from walking miles through ice and brush. But what chilled Dalton Price more than her silence was what he found hidden beneath her dress, a hand-sewn pouch, slick with blood, holding a leather-bound journal that felt too warm for the cold night. That journal would become the single most damning piece of evidence in what many now call the most disturbing cult story never told. Inside it, prayers that weren't prayers, rituals that weren't of God, and names, so many names scratched out with urgency. The girl wouldn't speak again for almost a week, but the pages would. And once they did, there was no turning back, because the further they read, the closer they got to something no one in Hollow Creek ever wanted uncovered. The journal smelled like pine, ash, and something metallic no one dared name. Sheriff Dalton Price waited until dawn before unsealing the stitched pouch they'd cut from the girl's torn dress. What lay inside was not just a diary, it was a confession wrapped in fear, written in slanted, uneven handwriting that bled off the pages. The first line stopped him cold. "If you're reading this, I might already be dead." The journal didn't follow dates. It followed punishments. Days marked by cold baths, silence drills, and something called the purging. The girl, who still hadn't spoken, had written about voices in the walls, children tied to prayer boards, and a man they called the Shepherd. Sheriff Price couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't reading history. He was reading prophecy. The deeper he flipped, the stranger it became. Sketches of bone-like symbols carved into trees, cryptic hymns scribbled in the margins, and page after page crossed out violently, as if someone had tried to erase the truth. But the truth had teeth, and it bit through every line. This wasn't just a runaway. This was a survivor from a place no one remembered or dared to remember. And somewhere beyond the pine woods of Hollow Creek, the shepherd might still be preaching. 3 days later, the church burned and not a single body was found whole. That's the line Sheriff Dalton Price underlined in red ink when he submitted the journal to federal agents. It wasn't just a warning. It was a countdown. As word of the frostbitten girl spread, rumours ignited across neighbouring counties, secret baptisms in the dead of night, children with no birth records, and prayers spoken backward under candlelight. Hollow Creek, once marked on maps as a farming cooperative, had long since vanished into whisper and wilderness. The journal called it the Fold. Outsiders knew it only by what they didn't know, a ghost town wrapped in scripture and silence. But the girl's journal changed that. Local newspapers printed excerpts under headlines like "The Cult in the Pines" and "Voices from the Fire Line." Lawmen began connecting dots that had never been dots before. Missing persons cases going back 10 years. All within a 30-mile radius of a single dirt trail leading into the woods. The journal didn't just expose a forgotten town. It resurrected it. Every line felt like a secret meant to stay buried. And yet there it was, ink soaked in trauma, truth, and something the sheriff called righteous terror. The final page was blank, but someone had smeared ash across it, as if the story wasn't over, just scorched. And with that, the investigation began. But none of them, not even Dalton Price himself, were prepared for what the next chapter would unleash. She didn't speak for 6 days, but when she did, her first words were, "He made us bury the mirrors." Her voice was barely audible, like wind through rotted wood. But it was enough to silence the entire room. Clara Whitlow, the girl with no past, had finally broken the curse of her silence. What came next wasn't a cry for help, it was a map of horror. Her testimony would unlock the gates to a compound the outside world hadn't seen in over 13 years. A place buried in snow and secrets, led by a man who preached purity, but practiced punishment. And as the agents leaned in to listen, none of them knew the path they were stepping onto wasn't just paved in lies. It was lined with bones, because the fold wasn't lost. It was waiting. He said the devil lived in reflections, that's why we couldn't have mirrors. Clara Whitlow's voice cracked as she finally spoke, her breath fogging up the interrogation room's glass. Agents leaned forward, tape recorder humming low, as she began to unravel what life inside the fold had been. There were no clocks, no mirrors, no music unless it came from the shepherd's mouth. Time moved in sermons, in punishments, in days of silence broken only by the sound of wooden switches snapping across bare skin. Clara spoke in fragments. At first we weren't allowed names. The babies didn't cry after the third day. Some kids forgot what colour was. Everything she said felt like a dream someone else had woken up from. But her eyes didn't blink. Her tone never broke. And it was that calmness, not hysteria, that terrified the room. She described the chapel buried in the forest, its windows blacked out, its pulpit shaped like a throne. She said the shepherd could make people disappear with just a prayer. And when asked why she finally ran, Clara paused, then whispered, because the new children weren't born the normal way anymore. That sentence changed everything. Investigators went from skeptical to horrified. And as they opened case files and cross-checked missing persons reports, one name kept reappearing: Obadiah Malachi Reed. The shepherd. We didn't call him Father. We called him Flame. Clara's voice didn't tremble as she said it, but the agents listening did. In the compound buried deep within the Utah wilderness, Obadiah Malachi Reed wasn't just a preacher. He was a prophecy in motion. To his followers, he wasn't a man. He was the flame that knows. A title Clara said no one dared speak aloud after sunset. She described the rituals with haunting clarity, children blindfolded and led into underground chambers. Women forced to fast until their bodies released sin. And boys tied to wooden beams while Reed recited verses from a Bible he had rewritten by hand. He said pain was the only proof that God was watching. She whispered. Clara recalled a stone altar where baptisms weren't done with water, but with ash. She said that ash came from things that once had names, things that used to cry. Investigators initially thought she was speaking in metaphors until they pulled old fire reports from the region and found multiple undocumented burns, each near the same remote coordinates. As Clara's memories poured out like broken glass, one agent wrote in his notebook, "If half of this is true, it rewrites what we think we know about modern cults in America." And they hadn't even reached the darkest part yet. They said I was the last mirror he couldn't break. That's how Clara described her final days inside the fold. A place she no longer called home, but the hollow. She told agents that Obadiah Reed had a gift: he could make people forget who they were. New names were assigned, old memories erased, and those who resisted, they were made to kneel until they forgot why they stood. Clara remembered being 9 when her real name was taken, and 17 when she stole it back. Reed's doctrine preached that individuality was the root of sin, that identity was a virus spread through eye contact, reflection, and memory. That's why mirrors were banned, why children were forbidden to speak their birth names, and why the chapel walls were painted black. He wanted to be the only thing we saw. Clara's voice turned hollow as she recounted how every act of kindness inside the compound, smiling, humming, holding hands, was punished as acts of self. She wasn't just escaping abuse. She was escaping erasure. One agent noted, "This isn't just trauma, it's identity reconstruction through fear." And when Clara described the night she fled through a crawl space beneath the chapel floor, she didn't cry. She just said, "I remembered who I was, and that was enough to make him hunt me." What Clara didn't know yet was that Obadiah Reed had disappeared 2 months earlier. But Hollow Creek hadn't. It was still there waiting. The deeper they went into the woods, the quieter the birds became, like nature itself refused to witness what still lived there. Armed with Clara's journal and coordinates scrawled in ash-smudged ink, federal agents and local lawmen began the long trek into Hollow Creek. What they found wasn't just a place, it was a wound in the earth that hadn't closed. And with every step forward, the line between myth and memory blurred. What they saw next would shatter any doubt that Clara had been telling the truth. The forest swallowed the sound of their radios, like Hollow Creek didn't want to be found. It took 3 hours of hiking through frostbitten underbrush before the team reached what Clara had called the gate. But there were no signs, no fences, just 2 massive pine trees scorched black from old fire. Their trunks carved with symbols no one could translate. The snow around them was untouched, but not clean. Ash mixed with powder. Bones mixed with root. The deeper they moved in, the more unnatural everything felt. Birds stopped singing. Branches didn't creak. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then they found the first cabin. Abandoned, but too recently. Bedding still warm. A pot of broth frozen mid-boil. Children's shoes by the door. No footprints, leaving just a single bloody handprint on the inside of the window. As if someone had watched them approach and vanished. One agent whispered, "This place isn't empty, it's hiding." And it was then they realized their satellite phones were dead. Compasses spinning. Signals lost. Whatever force had kept Hollow Creek hidden for over a decade was still active. And now it had company. And something someone was watching. There were no clocks, but time moved differently the moment they crossed the chapel line. The team's boots crunched over what should have been snow, but it wasn't. It was ash, grey, soft, and strangely warm beneath the surface. The deeper they moved into the heart of Hollow Creek, the more distorted everything became. Trees bent at angles that defied nature. Animal carcasses were arranged in circles, their eyes removed, their limbs posed like puppets in prayer. Then they saw it, the chapel. Not whitewashed and serene like Clara described, but charred, blistered, and pulsing with the kind of silence that screams. It hadn't collapsed, it had been gutted. Walls intact, roof missing, and symbols carved into the pews that didn't exist in any known language. They approached carefully, rifles drawn, breath fogging the air. One agent, Price's deputy, touched the doorframe and immediately collapsed, convulsing, eyes wide and locked onto something no one else could see. He whispered, over and over. The shepherd's mouth was still moving. But the chapel was empty. Or so they thought. Because then, from beneath the altar, they heard knocking from the inside. They opened the altar and found a staircase that led nowhere on any map. Beneath the pulpit, hidden by soot-stained floorboards and sealed with wax symbols, was a trapdoor no one had expected. The agents pried it open, the air beneath rushing out like a breath held too long. It reeked of copper, mould, and something wet with memory. The staircase spiraled down into the earth, carved from stone slick with moisture and etched with more of the unrecognizable symbols. As they descended, radios crackled with static, flashlights flickered despite full batteries, and one agent vomited mid-step, saying he heard children crying backward, The air grew colder, then suddenly hotter. One wall bore claw marks, not animal, but human, dragged downward. At the bottom, they found a room. Circular. No doors, no windows, just a single wooden chair, bolted to the floor, and a tape recorder sitting beside it, still playing on a loop. Say his name and be purified. Say his name and be purified. But the tape had no end, and no one had touched it in years. Then one agent asked the question they all feared. If the tape's been looping this long, who pressed play? What they didn't know was that someone or something was already behind them. Watching, breathing, smiling. The tape wasn't the only thing left behind. There were pages too, and blood, lots of it. What the agents uncovered next would rip the case wide open and confirm every dark suspicion Clara had whispered. Hidden behind the walls, buried beneath hymnals, and scattered across makeshift crypts were the final records of the Fold's descent into madness. And one entry, dated just days before the fire, bore a chilling message: the shepherd is no longer a man. They thought they were uncovering a cult. What they found was a blueprint for something far worse. Inside a locked compartment beneath the chapel's stone floor, the agents discovered a journal bound in stitched skin, verified later to be human. It wasn't Clara's. It was his. Obadiah Malachi Reed had documented every sermon, every punishment, every so-called miracle in unsettling detail. The pages weren't written in order, they spiraled, mirrored, layered with drawings of mutated infants, diagrams of rituals involving heat, light deprivation, and mirror fasting. One phrase repeated like a curse: purge the self, praise the flame. Reed believed the human soul had to be broken in darkness before it could be burned clean by his light. He wasn't preparing his followers for death. He was preparing them for transformation, something he claimed began after the final ashfall. The journal ended mid-sentence, interrupted by a blood-soaked thumbprint smearing the words, "The children are ready." At that moment, logic cracked. This wasn't a case. It was a doctrine. And it was unfinished. Because something, or someone, had picked up where Reed left off. They thought he vanished in the fire, but Reed never left Hollow Creek. Tucked beneath a floorboard in what had once been his quarters, agents discovered a sealed iron box. Inside teeth. Dozens of them. Some baby teeth. Some adult. All surgically removed and tagged with dates. Alongside them, a reel of Super 8 film. No label, no sound. Just grainy footage of Reed standing before a group of children, their eyes covered, their mouths sewn shut with black thread. He raises his hands and mouths something again and again. I am the last light. I am the last light. The film cuts to black, but the final frame remains burned into every agent's memory. Reed turning slowly toward the camera, eyes pitch black and smiling as if he knew someone someday would be watching. Blood tests later confirmed something worse. None of the DNA on the teeth matched any known victims. These weren't from the 47 confirmed lost. These were newer, which meant the rituals had continued, even after the fire, even after Clara escaped. And perhaps they never really stopped. The map wasn't on paper, it was carved into a child's rib. In a hidden crawl space behind the chapel furnace, agents uncovered a box wrapped in rotting fabric. Inside was a single human rib bone. smoothed and etched with coordinates and symbols that matched no known cartography. Forensics confirmed it belonged to a child age estimated around 8. But there was more. Beneath the bone, wrapped in wax-stiff cloth, were dozens of crude charcoal drawings. Each one featured the same figure, a tall man with flame-like hair, no eyes, and arms stretched unnaturally long. In every sketch, he stood behind groups of children, sometimes dozens, always faceless, always reaching. The most disturbing image was drawn in red. It depicted the chapel, not as it was, but fully rebuilt, with black spires stretching into a starless sky. And in the foreground, Clara, alone, surrounded by ash. Beneath it, one phrase scribbled in a child's shaky handwriting. He says, "I'm next." These weren't just remnants of trauma. They were warnings, predictions. And if the coordinates on the rib were right, Hollow Creek was just one site. The real map was still incomplete. The chapel didn't just echo, it responded. During the final sweep of the underground chamber, Agent Price noticed something impossible. Every time they spoke certain words, Clara's name, Reed's title, the phrase "last light, the room grew colder." Not metaphorically, literally. A thermal reader confirmed that the temperature dropped by 11 degrees within seconds, localized only around the speaker's body. One tech tried whispering the name again, and the power in their flashlights drained instantly. Cameras malfunctioned. A backup drone sent to hover above the site lost signal the moment it passed the chapel roofline. But what broke them wasn't the tech. It was the sound. A low hum began to rise from beneath the stone floor. Not mechanical, not human. It was harmonic, choral, children, singing. But when the team followed the sound to its source, they found no speaker, no recording, only a wall. And behind it, sealed in concrete, was a row of tiny handprints, all facing inward, like the children had reached out not to escape, but to hold something in. Logic shattered. Faith ruptured. Because this wasn't just a place of suffering. It was a container, and something was still inside. It wasn't just a cult. It was a cycle, and it was resetting. In the final hour of their investigation, the team unearthed a rusted filing cabinet buried beneath the old well behind the chapel. Inside were birth records, dozens of them dated decades apart, but bearing identical names. Clara's, Jonah's, even Obadiah Reed's. Again and again, the same children, born under different surnames, in different counties, but all linked to the Hollow Creek perimeter. The implications were impossible, unless someone was choosing children to carry the memory, to be vessels, hosts. The rituals hadn't just been physical, they were generational, spiritual, designed to overwrite identity across bloodlines. One file contained a photograph of a girl identical to Clara, taken in 1947. Another, a boy with Reed's face, dated 2023. This wasn't history. It was architecture. A blueprint for eternal recurrence. Built on sacrifice, memory, and fire. And the final note, handwritten in ash black ink, read, "They forget. But I remember. The fold is never broken. Only bent." At that moment, every agent knew the truth. They hadn't stopped the ritual. They had reignited it. They came to end a haunting. But all they did was wake it up, What began as a search for truth became a descent into something timeless, viral and violently unfinished. The Fold was never meant to be understood. It was meant to be repeated. And now, with the evidence sealed, the town erased, and the tapes mysteriously corrupted, all that's left is what comes next. The ashes have settled, but the echoes won't fade. After the compound burned, the survivors scattered like shattered glass, each piece carrying scars no one could see. Clara Whitlow vanished into the shadows of a new identity. But the trauma lingered in every haunted silence. The town surrounding Hollow Creek whispered about what they'd lost and what might still be lurking beneath the forest floor. Psychologists called it complex trauma, but to the families left behind, it was a living nightmare that replayed with every winter storm, every distant howl in the dark. Federal investigations stalled amid missing evidence and corrupted files, but the truth seeped through cracks in official stories, sparking conspiracy theories and viral online discussions that still haunt forums today. The Fold was never just a cult. It was a warning about how faith, fear, and fanaticism can poison a community. And as new disappearances surface in remote corners of America, many wonder if the cycle is really broken or only waiting to begin again. The question remains, what happens when the darkest secrets refuse to stay buried? Justice was served, or so they thought. The federal case against the Fold's remnants became one of the most haunting legal battles in American history. With physical evidence lost to fire and time, prosecutors relied heavily on Clara Whitlow's diary, transforming it into a chilling courtroom exhibit that exposed the darkest abuses of faith and power. Survivors faced lifelong battles with PTSD, their stories fueling viral campaigns demanding reform in how cult-related trauma is treated in the U.S. But the psychological scars ran deeper than anyone imagined. Communities once shattered by the Fold still feel the ripple effects, disappearances, whispers of secret gatherings, and a growing underground network of survivors sharing their truths. The case reopened debates on how fanaticism can infect rural America, and how easily it can be hidden behind prayer and tradition. As internet forums buzz with theories and survivors' testimonies go viral, the question lingers. How do you heal a wound that was never meant to be seen? And more terrifyingly, can you ever truly escape the Fold? Some wounds don't heal. They fester in silence. Years after the fire consumed Hollow Creek, survivors like Clara Whitlow still struggle with the shadows Reed left behind. Therapy centers flooded with cases of deep psychological trauma tied to cult abuse, sparking nationwide conversations about the long-term effects of religious fanaticism. Viral documentaries and survivor interviews exploded across social media, turning once forgotten victims into voices demanding justice and reform. Yet, despite all the exposure, many survivors report ongoing nightmares, visions of chanting, of dark rituals, and the chilling presence of Reed's shadow in their dreams. Families remain fractured, communities remain wary, and the landscape around Hollow Creek still feels haunted, as if the forest itself remembers the horrors hidden beneath the snow. The Fold's legacy is a chilling reminder even when the flames die down. The darkness left behind can stretch for generations, casting long, cold shadows over the future. And the question remains, can true healing ever begin when the past refuses to let go? The Fold's story didn't end with the fire, it evolved into a digital nightmare. In the years following the investigation, forums and social media exploded with viral content dissecting the cult's history, rituals, and survivors' testimonies. Conspiracy theories flourished, some claiming that remnants of Obadiah Reed's doctrine had spread into secret online communities and underground groups. Survivors' accounts sparked documentaries and podcasts that reached millions, shining a spotlight on the dangers of fanaticism masked as faith. But with the spotlight came danger, threats to survivors and investigators alike, as anonymous voices warned of the flames' return. Researchers found patterns of similar disappearances in remote areas, reigniting fears that the fold's darkness was contagious, surviving in shadows beyond the compound's ashes. As viral awareness grew, so did the chilling realization that this wasn't just history. It was a cautionary tale with an active pulse. And somewhere, in the darkest corners of the web, the story was far from over. The worst secrets refused to stay buried. Years after Hollow Creek's ashes cooled, whispers persist that the fold never truly ended. Viral videos and documentaries keep the memory alive, but some survivors warn the darkness has mutated. New cults, new rituals, same twisted doctrine spread silently through rural America and online forums. Families shattered by fear and secrecy still feel the weight of Obadiah Reed's legacy ghosts stalking the edges of memory and reality. Social media groups share coded warnings, survivor testimonies, and cryptic symbols linked to the original fold, sparking viral debates and conspiracy theories. The truth is no longer confined to history books. It lives in the present, hidden in plain sight. And the haunting question remains, when faith turns to fanaticism, how far can evil spread before we realize it's already inside us? The fold's story is not just a warning. It's a call to watch, to listen, and to remember before history repeats itself. The story of Hollow Creek and the fold is a chilling reminder that darkness can hide behind the most sacred masks, and that truth, no matter how horrifying, must be brought into the light. If this tale unsettled you, remember that awareness is the first step toward prevention. Your voice matters in breaking the silence that allows such horrors to fester. Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Let's start a conversation that honors survivors and warns others. Don't forget to save this video so you can revisit the lessons it holds. And hit that subscribe button to stay informed with more real stories that reveal the shadows behind closed doors. Together, we can shine a light that no darkness can withstand.